The medical bay on the Vithara station smelled like ozone and something faintly chemical that Marcus Hale had never been able to identify in the 3 days since they'd brought him in. Not unpleasant, just foreign, like everything else here. The Corvani physician, her name was something with too many syllables and a click in the middle that his translator rendered as Dr. Sarath, stood across the examination table with her 4-fingered hands folded behind her back, studying the readout hovering in front of her with the particular stillness of someone who had encountered a fact they were not prepared to accept. She had been standing like that for 11 minutes. Marcus had counted. He was good at counting time. It was one of the things he did when he was trying not to think too hard about his situation, which at the moment included being aboard an alien medical station 47 light minutes from the nearest human vessel, having his blood drawn 6 times in the past 2 days by increasingly senior Corvani physicians, and wearing a medical gown that had clearly been designed for a species with a different number of limbs. "Your results," Dr. Sarath said finally, "are not possible." "You've said that," Marcus said, "after every test, because after every test I have been correct." She turned from the readout to look at him directly. The Corvani had wide-set eyes the color of polished amber, with pupils that contracted vertically in strong light. Hers were currently very narrow. "The cellular regeneration markers we recorded this morning are consistent with an organism that has recently recovered from trauma significant enough to require complete systemic reconstruction." "You have no trauma history in the records your government provided." "I don't," Marcus agreed. "The bone density readings from your initial scan placed your skeletal structure in the 98th percentile of all species we have documented in the Coalition database. We recalibrated the equipment. The recalibrated reading was higher." "Huh," Marcus said. Dr. Sarath studied him the way someone studies a locked door they are becoming increasingly convinced is not actually locked, just heavy. "Mr. Hale, you were brought here because your shuttle experienced a pressure failure in the docking corridor of Vithara Station, and you were exposed to vacuum conditions for a period of approximately 40 seconds before the emergency seals engaged." "I remember," Marcus said. "The standard survival threshold for that exposure duration without a pressure suit is 0. No documented species survives 40 seconds of unprotected vacuum exposure. Most do not survive 20. She paused. "You presented to the medical bay with a mild headache and asked if we had anything for ear pressure." "My ears were really bothering me," Marcus said. She turned back to the readout. Then she turned back to him. Then she looked at the readout again as if hoping it had changed in the past 3 seconds. It had not. Marcus Hale was 31 years old and had spent the previous 6 years working as a structural integrity technician for Meridian Transit, which was a company that moved cargo containers through the mid-corridor trade routes, and paid slightly above average wages, and asked very few questions about background. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a remarkable person. He had tested unremarkably throughout school, had been unremarkably employed, and had unremarkably ended up on Vithara Station because Meridian Transit needed someone to verify that a load of prefabricated habitat modules had survived the transit from the outer belt without stress fractures, and Marcus was the most junior technician on staff, which meant he got the long trips. He had not planned to nearly die in a docking corridor. He had not planned to be the subject of a Corvani medical investigation that was now apparently on its 4th day. And he had not planned, when he'd chosen this career, to be the kind of person anyone spent 11 minutes staring at. The thing was, and this was the part Marcus found difficult to explain, because it required explaining something he had never quite been able to explain to himself. He had known during those 40 seconds in the corridor that he was going to be fine, not believed, not hoped, known in the specific flat way he knew his own name, with no fear attached to it, the way you know a fact you memorized so long ago it no longer feels like information, just furniture. He had been cold briefly, his ears had hurt, and then the seals had come down, and he had walked to the medical bay, and the young Corvani intake nurse had taken one look at his readings and gone very still, and that stillness had propagated upward through the station's medical hierarchy like a stone dropped in still water, and now here they were. "I'd like to ask you something," Dr. Sarath said. "Go ahead. Has anything like this happened before?" Marcus thought about it honestly, which was something he tried to do. He thought about the mining accident on Vashiri Station 4 years ago, when a support strut had come down and across his back and the site supervisor had been convinced something was broken, and he had walked it off. He thought about the decompression event on the Meridian Hall 2 years ago, briefer than this one, The kind of thing that would have ruptured capillaries in anyone else's eyes and hadn't touched his. He thought about the fact that he had, at some point in the past decade, stopped getting sick. Some smaller things, he said. Nothing I ever thought was worth reporting. Dr. Sareth closed the readout with a gesture and turned to face him fully. She had the manner of someone who had spent a long career telling patients difficult news and had learned to be direct about it. I need to contact the Coalition Science Directorate. Okay, Marcus said. This will result in a more extensive examination process, likely several weeks. I have a delivery deadline. Something shifted in her expression. Mr. Hale, you survived 40 seconds of vacuum exposure without a pressure suit and presented with ear discomfort. Your delivery deadline is perhaps not the primary concern here. The client would disagree. Shai studied him. Again, that same quality of stillness, not uncertainty exactly, more like the focused quiet of someone running calculations they had not expected to need. You are very calm about this. I'm always calm about things I can't change, Marcus said. And right now I can't change anything, so... Most people in your situation would be frightened. Most people in my situation would be dead, Marcus said. Which suggests my situation might be different enough from most people's that their emotional responses don't necessarily apply. Dr. Sareth was quiet for a moment. That is either very rational or very strange. Probably both, Marcus said. The Coalition Science Directorate sent a representative on the second day after Dr. Sareth's report. Her name was Senior Analyst Voss, and she arrived on the station with a 4-person technical team and an equipment manifest that suggested she'd been preparing for something significantly more dramatic than a cargo technician in a medical gown. She was Corvani, like most of the station staff, but carried herself differently, with the particular alert quality of someone trained to take in rooms before engaging with the people in them. She was younger than Dr. Sareth, with the close-cropped head markings that Marcus had learned indicated specialist academic training, and she had, in the first 2 minutes of their meeting, asked him 14 questions, each one a logical extension of the last, each one calibrated to the answer he'd given before it. Marcus found this immediately interesting. He liked people who listened to answers instead of just waiting to ask the next question. The vacuum exposure is the index event, Voss said, reviewing Dr. Sareth's documentation at a speed that suggested she read faster than she appeared to, but it's not the only anomaly. Your cellular regeneration profiles suggest an organism running at continuous low-level repair that would require energy expenditure we can't account for metabolically. You should be consuming approximately 4 times your reported caloric intake. I eat a lot, Marcus said. Define a lot. People comment on it, Marcus said. I've learned to eat before social situations. Voss looked up from the documentation. For the first time since she'd arrived, she paused before the next question. You've been aware of this for some time. I've been aware that I'm different in some ways, Marcus said carefully. I haven't been aware that it was this different. The ear thing was the worst I can remember. I usually come out of situations that should be worse with. Less than I expected, less damage, he agreed. Voss set down the documentation. Her amber eyes were doing the same thing Dr. Sareth's had done, that particular focused calculation, except where Dr. Sareth's had been weighted toward disbelief, Voss's had shifted somewhere closer to something Marcus might have called fascination. Mr. Hale, I want to be transparent with you about something, please. What you're describing, what your physiology is demonstrating, doesn't fit any model we have for human biology. I've reviewed the human physiological database maintained by the Coalition since first contact. Your readings fall outside every documented range for your species. Not slightly outside. Not within a reasonable variance. Category outside. How outside, Marcus said. Voss considered how to answer that for a moment. When we measure physical resilience across Coalition species, we use a standardized index. The Corvani score between 4 and 6. The Dretheri, you may know them as the heavy gravity species from the Veth clusters, score between 7 and 9. They are considered, for their mass, among the most physically durable species in the Coalition. She paused. Your readings, given the vacuum exposure data and the bone density scans and the regenerative markers, suggest a score of somewhere between 11 and 13. Marcus sat with that for a moment. That can't be right, he said. No, Voss agreed. It can't. And yet, here we are. She said it with an odd quality in her voice. Not alarmed, not entirely. More like someone who has opened a door expecting a supply closet and found a room that had no business being there, and is now standing in the doorway trying to decide how they feel about that. What happens now? Marcus asked. We run more tests, Voss said. Thorough ones. The kind that require equipment I didn't bring, which means I need to request a full research team. That takes approximately 8 days to arrange. She looked at him steadily. I'm asking for your cooperation. You have it, Marcus said. I'd like some answers too, honestly. It's strange not knowing why you're different. Most species, Voss said carefully, if they discovered they were this far outside the norm, would find that more distressing than strange. I've had longer to not know than you have, Marcus said. The strange part wore off a while ago. Now I'm mostly curious. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a tone that was precise and controlled but had something else running underneath it that Marcus didn't have the cultural reference to identify, she said, "That is a very unusual response." "I've been told," Marcus said, "that I have unusual responses to most things." The 8 days passed in the specific way that time passes when you are waiting for something, and have very little control over the shape of the wait, Marcus read. He slept more than usual, which he'd noticed happened when his body had been through something significant, even if he hadn't felt it at the time. He had long, careful conversations with Dr. Sereth, who had moved from clinical assessment to something that felt closer to genuine curiosity, asking him questions about his childhood, his health history, events he'd survived without registering as survivals. On the 4th day, she had asked him, with the careful neutrality of a physician who suspected the answer, whether any of his biological relatives had shown similar anomalies. Marcus had thought about his father, who had worked blast mining for 30 years, and retired with his hearing intact when no one else in his crew had. His grandmother, who had survived a shuttle crash at 62 with what the medical report described as inexplicably minor injuries for the severity of the impact. His older brother, who'd worked planetary surveys in high radiation zones for a decade, and whose annual physicals came back cleaner than they should have. Possibly, Marcus had said. I never thought about it in those terms. Dr. Sereth had made a note in her documentation without comment, but the quality of her stillness afterward had been different. More settled, like someone who has confirmed a hypothesis they weren't sure enough about to say out loud. The research team arrived on day 9 instead of day 8 because one of the equipment transports had a navigational delay, which Marcus found faintly amusing. He had ended up on this station because of a navigational failure. It seemed like a theme. The team lead was a scientist named Dr. Orvith, older than Voss, with the slow, deliberate manner of someone who has spent decades being the most careful person in any room and is not interested in changing that. He reviewed all the documentation before speaking to Marcus directly, which took most of the first day. When he did finally sit down across from him, his expression was that of a man who has double-checked his math 3 times and keeps getting the same answer he doesn't want. Your readings, Dr. Orvith said, have been independently verified by my team against the original data, and? Marcus said, and they are accurate. He said it the way someone says something that they have decided to accept in the interest of proceeding, regardless of whether they have emotionally processed it. Mr. Hale, I want to show you something. He pulled up a comparative display, a stack of physiological data Marcus couldn't read in detail, but could parse by shape. Dense columns of numbers with a highlighted range and, at the far end of the scale, a single data point sitting clearly outside the s. This is the Coalition Species Resilience Database. Every documented species, 1,411 total. Dr. Orvith indicated the cluster of data. Every documented human individual we have physiological records for falls here. He moved his hand to the outlying point. You are here. That's a significant gap, Marcus said. It is, Dr. Orvith said. Mr. Hale, we need to determine whether this is an individual anomaly, something specific to your biology, your family line, possibly a genetic variation unique to you, or whether this is something that has been present in your species in undetected form for longer than we've understood. Why would it be undetected? Marcus asked. Because, Voss said from where she stood at the edge of the room, and Marcus had noticed that she had a way of being precise at exactly the moment precision mattered, it only becomes visible under conditions that, for most species, do not produce survivors to examine. Vacuum exposure, high-impact trauma, radiation. The situations in which these markers would express are the situations in which normal individuals don't return to a medical bay to be scanned. Marcus sat with that. So, he said slowly, you're saying the reason no one noticed is because the test is usually fatal? Yes, Voss said. And the reason I'm here is because I passed the test. Also yes. Marcus looked at the data display for a moment. At the single point sitting clear of the cluster, labeled with his name and his station ID and a timestamp from the day they'd first scanned him. He had spent most of his adult life being, professionally, someone who checked other people's work, ran the numbers someone else had run, verified the load tolerances someone else had calculated. The job that existed specifically because important things needed a second set of eyes, and his eyes were steady and he had good judgment about when something was wrong. And that was enough, and he had been content with enough. He was not sure how to be the data point outside the cluster. "What do you need from me?" he asked. What they needed from him, it turned out, was a great deal. Blood draws that were no longer routine, stress tests calibrated to species significantly more durable than the equipment had been designed for, a series of increasingly strange sessions in which he was asked to perform tasks under conditions that kept being quietly recalibrated upward, because the initial parameters kept producing no response. Dr. Orvith ran the tests with methodical precision and recorded everything and said very little. His team, 4 scientists of varying Corvani specialties, did the same. Voss was different. She observed and asked questions, and unlike the rest of the team, she asked questions about things that weren't strictly scientific, about how Marcus had grown up, what he'd wanted, how he'd ended up where he'd ended up, whether he'd ever wanted something other than the kind of work he did. "Why does that matter?" Marcus asked on the 5th day of testing. "It might not," Voss said. "I'm trying to understand whether the physiological profile correlates with anything behavioral, whether species that develop this kind of resilience also develop particular cognitive patterns and—" "You're remarkably unimpressed by yourself," she said. "Most individuals, upon learning they are significantly outside the documented norm for their species, display a measurable stress response. You've displayed something closer to mild interest." "I told you," Marcus said. "The strange wore off." "It's been 11 days since the incident," Voss said. "The strange hasn't worn off for us." Marcus looked at her. She had a directness about her that was different from Dr. Orvith's clinical precision or Dr. Sereth's careful concern, a quality of actually wanting to understand something, not just document it. The amber eyes steady and specific, watching him the way she watched data with full attention. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "Yes. In everything you've found so far, the tests, the scans, whatever you haven't told me yet, is any of it bad? Medically bad? Is there something wrong with me that I need to worry about?" Voss was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "Nothing we've found suggests anything pathological. Everything suggests the opposite, a system running at a level of efficiency and resilience we don't have a medical framework for. You are not sick, Mr. Hale. You are something we don't have a category for." "That's not reassuring in the way you might think," Marcus said. "I know," Voss said. And something in the way she said it was different from clinical acknowledgement, warmer than that, and more honest. "I imagine it is strange, being a category you have to invent." "It is," Marcus said. "But I've had worse weeks." Voss paused, then carefully she almost smiled. "You said that on the first day, that you'd had worse weeks." "I have," Marcus said. "The incident where I said that was—" He paused, considering. "My 3rd worst week in the past 4 years. 4th, maybe. It's a competitive list."
"What was the worst?"
"There was a structural failure on a habitat module I was supposed to certify," Marcus said. "I'd signed off on it. The company had cut corners on the composite materials without telling me. 12 people almost died." He paused. "They didn't, but they almost did. And that was my signature on the report." Voss was quiet. "I quit Meridian Transit the same day," Marcus said. "Went back 6 months later because I needed the work and they were the only posting available. But I quit first. That mattered to me." "It should," Voss said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Anyway, the vacuum thing was genuinely fine. Physically. The paperwork afterward has been more inconvenient. I'll note your feedback on our documentation process," Voss said, and that quality was back in her voice, precise and measured, and underneath it, something else, something that had been developing across 11 days and 17 conversations and more hours spent in the same room than either of them had planned. The preliminary report went to the Coalition Science Directorate on day 16. Marcus didn't see it, but Dr. Orvith told him, in the flat summary way of someone who has decided to be honest because there is no practical alternative, that it would result in significant institutional interest, that humans as a species would need to be re-examined against the parameters Marcus's data had suggested, that the implications extended beyond any single individual. "What does that mean for me?" Marcus asked. "There will be further requests," Dr. Orvith said. "Other researchers' examinations, likely over years rather than weeks. Your cooperation will be formally requested by the Directorate. And if I say no?" Dr. Orvith considered this. "You are free to say no, it would be noted. But the data we've already collected cannot be unrecorded." I'm not saying no, Marcus said. I just wanted to know if I could. You can, Dr. Orvith said, with something approaching respect in his voice, which Marcus had not heard from him before. It was Voss who escorted him to the docking bay when his release was processed, which Dr. Orvith's team had noted among themselves in the specific low-voiced way of colleagues who had observed a pattern and were deciding whether to say something about it. The station's main corridor connected the medical wing to the docking platforms through a long passage with viewports along one side, and for the first time in 16 days, Marcus was walking through it instead of being transported through it on a medical tray. Outside the viewports, the outer belt was a scatter of slow-moving rock and ice against a backdrop so dark, it looked less like space and more like the idea of space, infinite and precise and completely indifferent. Your delivery, Voss said. The habitat module's gone to someone else by now, Marcus said. The company will have reassigned the route. I'll catch up with the next transit cycle. Does it bother you? The job? No. The client will be fine. He paused. It bothers me a little that I didn't get to check the composite materials myself. The company has a history with that. Voss walked beside him in silence for a moment. You came here to do a job, she said, to make sure the materials held, to verify something important so that if it didn't hold, there was a record and someone was accountable. That's what you do. That's what I do, Marcus agreed. And you survived 40 seconds of vacuum exposure and 2.5 weeks of coalition scientific examination, and you still think the main thing is whether the composite materials were up to spec. The composite materials are what matter to the 12 people living in the habitat, Marcus said. My scan results matter to the directorate. Those aren't the same priority. Voss stopped walking. She was at the edge of the docking platform corridor now. The bay entrance 10 meters behind Marcus, the sound of bay operations a low hum from beyond the pressure door. She had been, for the past 16 days, the most consistently focused person in the room. Attentive in the way that suggested she was always tracking more than she appeared to be tracking, and she was looking at him now with that quality fully visible, nothing professional left to moderate it. Mr. Hale, she said. Marcus is fine, he said, after 16 days. Something shifted in her expression, small but specific. Marcus, when the directorate's formal team contacts you, and they will within the month, I intend to be present for the follow-up review. In what capacity? The report is nominally Dr. Orvith's, Voss said, but the contextual analysis is mine. The behavioral correlation work, the section that argues the physiological findings are not an individual anomaly, but a systematic underestimation of human capability across the documentation record. She paused. I'll be presenting it. It seemed like something you should know. Marcus thought about that. About what it meant to have someone argue, in a formal scientific document, that everything people had recorded about his species needed to be looked at again. That the gap between what humans appeared to be and what they actually were had been sitting in the data this entire time, invisible because the conditions that revealed it were the conditions no one was supposed to walk away from. I'd like to hear that presentation, he said. I expect you will, Voss said. Given that you'll be the primary subject of it. That's not why I said it, Marcus said. She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was doing something, turning something over, running it against some internal calibration, and then she said, carefully, I know, that's what made it worth noting. He boarded the transport. She returned to the research section. The corridor between them was exactly the length it had always been, and the data in the directorate's files was exactly as strange as it had always been. And somewhere in the gap between what was documented and what was real, an accidental vacuum incident had opened a door that neither of them had known was there. The habitat module delivery was reassigned to another technician and arrived 11 days late due to secondary transit. Everything Marcus Hale had walked away from that docking corridor carrying arrived exactly on schedule.